Geweldig. So, the Heilige Gemara, I believe we are at the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Actually, we got up just to the top of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. Today, we're going to finish the parak. So, yesterday we learned the different shitas of koitzer l'shachas legabe whether or not it's mutter by the oimer, and we had multiple shitas. We had two shitas in our Mishnah. We had Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, where both hold you're not allowed to be koitzer l'shachas if it's for human consumption, only for a behemoth. Except that Rabbi Yehuda holds you could only cut for shachas if you start before it becomes a third grown, and Rabbi Shimon holds that you could even cut lebehema l'shachas even if it's more than a third grown. And then we had the shita of Rabbi Meir, who said that it even applies to achilas odom. If you're koitzer l'shachas, and the Gemara wanted to say that if Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi, then he would have to make a distinction between before 3 months and after 3 months. It's just that the Gemara had a steer to that from another brisa that Rav Meir says by being koitzer, where Rav Meir says even if it was cut down by animals, it's still going to be usher, and therefore he would have to make that distinction between before 3 and after 3. So therefore, the Gemara was forced to say that Reb Meir is a different shita, and Reb Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva, who holds af la'odam nami la'hava ketzira. Reb Yehuda also holds that cutting shachas down for the purposes of human consumption is not called a ketzira, and therefore would not be prohibited. But even so, there's a minute chiluk between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Akiva holds that even if it's menamer la'otzer, even if it's more than a third grown, it would still not be considered. It would still not be considered a ketzira, and it would not be prohibited. Yet Rabbi Meir holds it would be, and the Gemara said there's not enough kamina that came out between if it's mutter to cut l'shachas. And the reason why it would be mutter or asr is whether or not we consider it a ksira, whether or not we consider it a harvest. The other nafkina would be is irrelevant to peya. If you cut in the area of your field l'shachas, then we look at it like a blank part of the field. We don't look at it like the beginning of a full harvest, and therefore it would create a separation between the parts that were cut l'shachas and the other parts, and each of those remaining parts would require its own payah to be taken. So that's what we discussed basically yesterday, and today's daf is Ayin Beis. We're changing program today, but we can't turn over to Amud because I forgot to bring the next Gemara. It's the last Gemara. So we're going to start right at the top, the second line from the top on daf Ayin Beis Amud Aleph. Zog the Heilige Gemara. Koitrin. We learned in the Mishnah that one of the exceptions to the Isur Ksira before the Omer was Mepnei Netiyos. We had two pshatim and Rashi, either if it was creating a scenario of Klayim, so you're allowed to cut to avoid that, A, or B, if it's just because you don't want the Netiyos to be drained of their nourishment, so we could cut down the wheat that's growing there to not squeeze out the netiyos there. If they needed extra space to sit, so therefore they were able to clear that area. Or if they need more room for the talmidim, they were able to clear an area by cutting, because that wouldn't be considered harvesting, because the purpose of their cutting is not to process the wheat, rather it is to create space. My timer, Ketzirchem Amrachmona Veloy Ketzir Mitzvah. These are not Ketzir Shorashus, they're Ketzir Shol Mitzvah, they're to facilitate a mitzvah, and therefore it's not considered a harvest. Veloy Yase Krichois Alva Monichin Tzvosum. If you're cutting and not to harvest, you're not allowed to bundle what you cut towards the process. Rather, you just leave them loose on the field because you're only cutting them because of other reasons, not for harvest. My timer, the kamida efshel loy tarchinan. Because if a zoivite don't do more than the bare minimum of what you're allowed to do with the Eimer product, but not more than absolutely necessary. Mitzvah Eimer lahavi min hakama. L'chatchila, you're supposed to cut growing wheat for the purpose of the carbon Eimer, and the Mishnah's but if you couldn't find any, you can also take Eimer, and you can take from that was cut, and if you can't find moist, you can take dry. Tell about it. It says in the pasuk. Let's look at the whole pasuk inside. Where am I? Psukim over here. Over here. Daber. Oh, we'll in both psukim. No, we'll in the second pasuk. It says v'im takriv minchas bikurim lashem oviv koli ba'esh geres karmel takriv es minchas bikurecha. So one of these im takrivs are extra. So the Gemara is going to suggest that the first one it should say ves minchas bikurim lashem oviv koliv takriv es minchas bikurecha. Why did it start the parsha with an extra of the im takriv? Zok the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon. The im takriv minchas bikurim. Ma tamud loimer. Why does it say it? And Rashi says the kasha specifically on why he says it in the first time in the pasuk. Because Rashi says ma tamud loimer v'ksiv b'seifa dekra takriv minchas bikurecha. Zok Gemara. L'fi mitzvah sa'imer lahavi min hakama b'balt l'chatchila. Mitzvah sa'imer means from standing wheat. Minayin she'im loy matzu min hakama. How do you know that if you can't find from kama, you can just take from already cut stalks, and it will also be a kosher carbon? Takriv. Davaracher, noch a reason for takriv. Takriv, libishamitzis lahavi minalach. Really, you're supposed to bring moist. Uminayin shimloi matzah minalach yave minayavesh. Yavi minayavesh. Talmudomer takriv. So takriv says, "Mikol makim, just bring in whatever scenario you find it in." Davar achar takriv levisha maksos. I looked to belayla. Mikra din when are you supposed to cut the omer the night after the first day of Pesach? Minayim shem nixer b'yoyim. How do you know if you cut it by day? And how do you know that doich es a Shaabos? How do you know that you could even cut omer on Shabbos? Tamlomer takriv. Takriv kol shahu, which means af min ha'imrim, even though it's standing. Takriv mikol makim, Rashi says means af min ha'rachik Yerushalayim, even if you have to go far away from Yerushalayim and you can't find it very nearby. And takriv va'afilu b'Shabbos, so the akravas ha'imr is doich Shabbos. Takriv va'afilu b'tumah, the akravas ha'imr is even doich tumah.
Yeah, I find it strange that you're allowed to doicha deraisa, a serious deraisa like Shabbos, from a drasha.
I hear, but are there no other examples of that?
There probably are, but it's still strange.
Like right, we learn from the Hashmini that you could do a bris even on Shabbos.
Right, but what we're so serious about Shabbos that we don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah.
It's paradoxical because on the one hand, a mitzvah hayoim we don't do, and the reason why we don't do it because somebody might carry.
That's right.
That I think it's called the Kanta D'Rava. It's a huge chiddush because, and how do we equate the two?
Right.
Don't blow shofar, even though it's a mefurish deraisa, because maybe someone will carry it. But how come no one's worried about someone carrying the knife by a bris? I don't know. I don't know the answer. Yeah, it's a good aura. It's a good aura. I hear. So Nixer b'yoyim. Nixer b'yoyim. This warrants another essay in Simply Pshat, because it's very fundamental as to how do Chazal know when yet to go and when not to.
yeah, not only that, yeah, yeah. Okay, I forgot what I was going to say, but the kasha is,
It's much stronger. There's so many
and
more
not only that, you couldn't find another reason why it says that
takriv or
yeah, yeah, right.
and we have multiple reasons that we're using one takriv mikol makom to include many different things. So what if it would be one less thing, like mehechatecha means that
Yeah,
mehechatesa means afilu b'Shabbos? I don't know. Because Gemara, Vatnan we learned. Kol halayla, says Niksha b'yoyim. I vatanya kol halayla kosher l'ktsir so'emer. Ulehekta chalavim ve'varim. We know that all night you can cut the omer, and all night they're normally maktir the chalavim and avarim of the karbanos of the previous day. Zaklal, davar shemitzvah kol hayoyim. Anything that its mitzvah is during the day, kosher kol hayoyim. Any time during the day, it would be allowed to do that. For instance, the zrika sadam of a carbon, or the shechita of a carbon that has to be done on a specific day. All day long, it would be appropriate to do its malachas. Davar shemitzvah b'yoyim kol hayoyim kosher and kosher kol hayoyim and davar shemitzvah b'layla kosher kol halayla. And you have to compare the zman, the time, or the time that it's muter yoim to the time that it's muter b'layla. So let's have a look. Katani laila domi yoim. The heter of kol halayla is similar to the heter of kol hayoim. Ma yoim b'layla loy. Just like avodah that can be done all day long. They're not allowed to be done at night. Shki arrives, no more zrika. After laila b'yoim nami loy. So two things that the Torah designates are kosher kol halayla would not be mutter by day, which means that k'tziras omer should not be mutter by day. K'tziras omer and hektar halavim ve'marim should only be mutter by night. Just like zrika and other avodas that are designated to be done by day are only going to be mutter to be done by day. Omer Rabba loy kasha. Ha Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon. One Mishnah is going to Rabbi, and one Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon. And Rashi tells us that Rabbi is the one who holds that it's kosher to do ksir b'yom, and Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon holds it's not kosher to do ksir b'yom. And if you look in our brisa and you're medayik that it's not kosher to do ktsir b'yom, you can say that that's going to go according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon, but Rabbi would argue on that. Where do you see a machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon about whether or not you're allowed to do ktsiras omer by day? Titania, if you were in the middle of being makriv the minchas omer, v'nitmas, and the minchas omer became tamei, what do you do? Im yesh acheres, if you have acheres, which Rashi means afilu b'chuber, so you're standing during the day, and your carbon number became tamei. So if you can find other wheat that you can cut, meaning cutting it by day, mevin acheres tachta, you replace this carbon number of what you cut last night, and you can cut fresh today. The kaitrin v'taychnoisa b'yoyim. Why do you do that? The omer is a carbon tzibur, and you would be allowed to go through with the carbon anyway. But we don't want people who see and realize that they're doing it with tumah to think, hey, maybe even my mincha could be tamei. So therefore, we try to make it as tar as we can. So if he doesn't, and we have to continue with this tamei, you say at least keep it quiet. Have a pikeach ushasoik. Be smart about it. Don't tell anybody, because the less people that realize it's tamei, the better it is. They don't need to know, and this way they won't mistakenly think that their personal omer could also be tamei. Divrei Rebbe. So here Rebbe is saying quite clearly that you can cut the omer by day. Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon omer, no. Benkach ubenkach. No matter what, whether or not you have more to cut today or not, do not cut more today, and have a pikeach ushasoik. and you're not allowed to cut new by day. Shekol ha'omer sheniksha shaloi k'mitzvasai possible. If the omer was cut shaloi k'mitzvasai, meaning not by night, it will be possible. So you have a clear machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, where Rabbi holds that it's kosher b'yom, and therefore he would not stim with the first Mishnah that we quoted that compares the karbanos of Yom to the avodas halayla, and Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds that if it's something that has to be done by Laila, cannot be done by Yom, and he would be the author of the first Mishnah that we quoted in the Gemara here. Gavaldik. We talked Rashi. Sheniksha shaloik mitzvah say puzzle. Umitzvahs tzira b'layla v'loy b'yom. Hilcha chad etani la'il niksa b'yom. Kosher is Rabbi. V'ad etanya puzzle would be Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. Gavaldik. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Zogt Rabba bar bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon b'shitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbi shal Aviv Amar. So Rabbi Shimon was the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar, who was Rabbi Shimon's son, is saying over what he learned from his father, that his father probably learned from his Rebbe. So Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon's shita can be traced back to his father's Rebbe. As Rashi says, Rabbi Shimon was the Talmid of Rabbi Akiva, Kedamer b'Yavamas b'Perek Habal Yivimtai, v'Haya Eilam Shomeim Ad Sheba Rabbi Akiva. That was the Rabbi Shimon talking. Okay, now what does Rabbi Akiva say? That's done. Klal Omer Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said a klal. Lagabi, what did he say this klal? Lagabi, a very famous shaila by Mila. B'Mila kamari b'Perek Kabbalah the Mila. And he said, Kol malach hashev shaloi la'asoisa me'erev Shabbos, ein yadaychus Shabbos. Bringing the Mila knife to the place where the bris will happen. According to Rabbi Elazar, you could do that on Shabbos. According to Rabbi Akiva, you cannot do it on Shabbos. You know why? Because you could have easily prepared it before Shabbos. So first of all, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds of this shita, that anything that you could have done Erev Shabbos is not going to be Doicha Shabbos. How does that translate into only allowing the Ktsiras Omer by night? We'll see. There's more to this. The Savarla, we also know that Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds like Rabbi Shmuel, as Rashi tells us, the Omer Ktsir HaOmer Mitzvah V'Doicha Shabbos. He also holds that it's Doicha Shabbos. So if you put these two things together, that anything that could be done before Shabbos is not Doicha Shabbos, and Ktsiras Omer is Doicha Shabbos, it must be that the Ktsiras Omer has to be done. It must be that the Ktsiras Omer has to be done specifically in this time and in no other time. So Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel said, Ma chorish rishus, af ketzir rishus. It says on Shabbos, bechorish ulekatzer tishbais. Just like chorish is never nageya for a mitzvah, so to ksira, even if it is nageya for a mitzvah, ksira is only also if it's a rishus. No, so just like charish could never be for a mitzvah, so too when the Torah prohibits ketzir, it's ketzir that's not for a mitzvah. Yot ketzir omer shehi mitzvah. Ketzir omer is a mitzvah, and therefore it will be doiche Shabbos. Now, zok the Gemara, v'sol kedaitach niksar shaloi kemitzvah say kosher. If you hold that niksar shaloi kemitzvah is kosher, which is like Rebbe, right? If you hold niksar shaloi kemitzvah is kosher, and it doesn't have to be cut b'dafka in that time, amai dachi Shabbos. Why would ktsira sa'omer ever be dachi Shabbos? If the zman a ktsira is not ma'akiv, so then niksar erev Shabbos. Do the cutting of the omer on the erev Shabbos. As Rashi says, we've already established that Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds like Rabbi Akiva, who is the Rebbe of his father, who says the Chol She'efshir L'Asoisa B'Erev Shabbos Ein Doicha Shabbos, Elamididach Shabbos. If we know that Ksir Seimer is Doicha Shabbos, it must be that it's impossible to do it at any other time. Because Rabbi Kiva says if it was possible, you would do it at a different time. So Shmamina, Nixa Shaloik Mitzvah say Pasul, Umitzvah say Lehave Ela b'Mitzvah Yom. There is absolutely no other time that would be approved to cut Omer. So by the same token, the Gam Laila Nami Mitzvah say Balayla v'loy b'Yom. If the mitzvah says Balayla, it has to be done b'dafka then. You can't do it by day. So therefore, it must be Elamadidachi Shabbos, Shemamina Nixo Shaloik Mitzvah say Pasul, and the time is at night, and it cannot be done at night. It cannot be done. It can only be done at night. Cannot be done in the day, and it cannot be done before, so that you can avoid Shabbos. Rather, it has to be done b'dafka at that time, and therefore, even according to Rabbi Kiva, you could be mechal Shabbos. It's not called chil Shabbos. You could cut Omer on Shabbos, which would really be Friday night, because that is the only time that you're allowed to do that. Gewaltig. Fragt the Gemara, what is the makar of the halacha that you're not allowed to do something on Shabbos if it could be done before? It was Rabbi Kiva, right? Now the problem is Rebbe lav talmidi Reb Shimonu. Rebbe was also a Talmud of Reb Shimon, and if Rebbe was a Talmud of Reb Shimon, then Rabbi Kiva is his Rebbe's Rebbe, right? So then the same way you're saying Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon paskin like Rabbi Kiva, Rebbe would have also paskin like Rabbi Kiva. Zokt Rashi, for Rebbe lav talmidi Reb Shimonu bitmia, v'amay lo shmiya le'midi Reb Shimon, d'sava like Rabbi Kiva, the chol she'ef shemay erev Shabbos lo yidachi Shabbos. Why didn't Rebbe take that on? And according to Rebbe, how could you hold Rebbe that you could do the Ksir Seimer even not at the designated time, even not by night, but even by day? Well, how could you do it on Shabbos? For Tanya, we learned, and this is merely going to prove that Rebbe was in fact the Talmud of Reb Shimon. Amar Rebbe, Kishahayinu l'meidin Torah etzel Reb Shimon. When we used to learn Torah by Reb Shimon, and this is before the days that the Rabbanan prohibited bathing on Shabbos, he wouldn't. I mean, it does happen, but he wouldn't. V'tanya Amar Rebbe, Kishahayinu l'meidin Torah etzel Reb Shimon, bitakua. It was in the Takua region. I guess it was in Romania. Takua is probably an area in the Eretz Yisrael. We would bring him oil and some type of beged. It was a towel. In other words, we were mishamish him to bring for him the tools that he would need to go to the mikvah. In other words, we didn't go from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaRabim. We were going from Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaYochid to Rishus HaYochid. So instead of walking down the streets, you passed it from backyard to backyard. So from the fact that he was Mishamish, his Rebbe, Reb Shimon, you see clearly that he was a Talmud of Reb Shimon. So why does Rebbe allow you to do something on Shabbos that could have been done at a different time? Zok Gemara, the teretz is Reb Shimon, because Rebbe follows another principle of Reb Shimon. The Tanya, Reb Shimon, Bo Urei, come and see, Kama Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. Rabbi Elazar Shida of Mitzvah B'Shaita Odav, Sharai Hektar Chalavim Veivorim, Ksherim Kalalayla. Really, the hektaris chalavim veivorim, like we started the sugya off, can be done all night. But that doesn't mean they waited till the night. If they had time, they were starting to be makter chalavim veivorim by day. They didn't wait, b'davka, not do the hektar chalavim veivorim until it got dark. Rather, they would even start during the day, as Rashi says. Even on Shabbos, they didn't wait till Matzah Shabbos. On Shabbos already, they started putting the imurim on the mizbech, even though it could be done by night. So Reb Shimon had another shita that you're allowed to do a mitzvah b'shaita even on Shabbos. So yes, Rabbi Kiva says you're not allowed to do preparation for a mitzvah on Shabbos that could have been done before Shabbos. But here you have a mitzvah mamish, and al chavivus of the mitzvah, you would be allowed to do something that could be done after Shabbos. So too, Rebbe hold that Vivaldi is a chavivus for the mitzvah of Bizmano of doing the ktsira by night. You would be able to do the ktsira on Shabbos, even though technically it could have been done at a different time. Now we have a little bit of a problem, because one of the questions that the Gemara asks is, according to Rebbe, Amai Dacha Shabbos Niktzerei Me'erev Shabbos. If you hold that you don't need a ksira to be done exactly by night and no other time, which is what the Gemara said, Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon holds, then why, if in fact it could be done any other time besides the night of the Omer, why is it Daicha Shabbos? That's what the Gemara asked to prove that Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon holds that it must be ksira can only be done by Laila. Frektais is an obvious kasha. I don't understand. What's your kasha? If you could have done it any other time, if any other time would be kosher, so then according to Rabbi Kiva, it shouldn't be Daicha Shabbos. What do you mean? But lechatchila, the mitzvah is belayla. So maybe Rabbi Kiva holds, yes, b'diavad, it could be done at a different time. But l'maisa, the lechatchila, the mitzvah, the pasuk says should be done by night. So maybe maybe to do the mitzvah in its best possible way, that would also be Daicha Shabbos. Zok Tosfos, no. Kibon did the Evid kosher, lo have it dumi de tamid. Where do we know that Hakravas Hakabon is Daicha Shabbos? From Tamid, where there is no possible way. If you did it at any other time, it would be Pasal Mamish. But if it would be kosher with the Evid, it would be Daicha Shabbos. So this is a very, very impactful Tosfos, and we'll see shortly how. Zok Tosfos, if you hold to the rule that if it could be done Erev Shabbos, you do it Erev Shabbos, you would do it Erev Shabbos even though you're going to be forced to do the mitzvah, not in the lechatchila fashion. How does this become very relevant to a machlokes achronim is as follows. We know the bris has to be done on the 8th day, right? What if someone did a bris on the 7th day? Is that a kosher bris, or must you do a toughest down bris? Must you do it over again? So there are more holds that it's good. You don't have to do it again. Frekt of them the shach. How could you possibly say that it will be a good bris? If it would be a good bris, why is Mila ever Daicha Shabbos? Do it on Friday. Do it on a different day. It must be that you have to do it on Shabbos. You're going to tell me that it's Daicha Shabbos because l'chatchila you're supposed to do it on the 8th day? Tosfos says not like that. Tosfos here contradicts us. Tosfos says if it would even be mutar b'di'evet, if you did it not on Shabbos, it would not be Daicha Shabbos. So from this Tosfos, the Shach brings a raya that it's impossible that a bris done on the 7th day should be good at all. Okay, so now we're back to Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon. Rebbe Taka agrees to Rabbi Kiva Rabbi that if you could do his Rebbe, that if you could do something before Shabbos, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. But there's another principle of Chavivus HaMitzvahs that you want to do it as soon as possible, and Mitzvah B'Shaita is a Davar Chaviv, and that's why you could do the Ktsir Shaimer even on Shabbos, even though technically it could have been done at a different time. Zok Gemara. The Rebbe Elazar Bar Shimon loy shamin alei. What about Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, who holds you wouldn't be able to do it on Shabbos? I'm sorry. What about Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, who holds that you could only do it at night? You can't do it by day, and you don't say al chavivus a mitzvah. You'll do it sooner. He didn't hear what Rabbi Shimon said about that halacha that I did the chaviva. Ella, what do you have to say? That he holds you can't compare the case of Hakta Chalav and Vevorim, which you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. You don't have to wait for Motzei Shabbos. You can't compare that to Tzira, where we'll do it on Shabbos because it's Chaviv. Because Shiny Hosam, Sharei Dochsa Shchitas Shabbos. The main mitzvah, the kickoff to the mitzvah of the Talmud was the Shchitas HaTalmud. That Kula Alma Moida has to be only on Shabbos. So therefore you could say once the main mitzvah is kicked off on Shabbos, you could carry it through and continue and even do the Hektar Chalav Mevarim on Shabbos because of the Chavivas HaMitzvah. But you can't apply that to the Omer because the Ketziris Omer is the kickoff. And the kickoff is not allowed to be done at any other time other than by night. Because if it would have been allowed at any other time, then it would be then it wouldn't be Deicha Shabbos. You're muted.
I could say the swear the other way. Once the main mitzvah was done on the bringing the korban, the hektar chalavim ve'evrim is secondary, and let that wait for after Shabbos.
Here, so let's see Rashi. Maybe I didn't bring out the svara properly. So Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon Lo Shemilei Had Chaviv Mitzvah B'Shaita B'Tmiyah Elo B'Koich. What do you have to say? Shemiyah. He heard about this halacha that you could be makter chalavim ve'murim even on Shabbos. V'loi Gamar Mina, and he wouldn't be able to learn from here that there's a chavivus, a mitzvah that tells us that you could even do it on Shabbos. To hasan kavei varim shiny. To dachu Shabbos mishum chavivus mitzvah sharei dachso shchita as a Shabbos kodim l'haktara. Before you want to do the haktara on Shabbos, you've already had to anyway do the shchita on Shabbos. The efshir la'asoysa miber of Shabbos. That we know. The shchitas hatomid has to be done b'davka on Shabbos. So you have an anchor clearly that must be done on Shabbos. So once the mitzvah is authorized to be done on Shabbos, you could do the rest of the malachas for that avoida on Shabbos. Even the nitin Shabbos litchas etzel shchita, because the Torah says so beferish b'mayadoi nitcha nami etzel aktara. Avol bo'omer by the korban omer. You don't see anywhere mufurish that the Torah says do this on Shabbos. The b'shas ktsira akati lo yitchi Shabbos. The akravas omer, no matter what, is doicha Shabbos. But the akravas omer does not occur until later. The avol gav the l'mocher dochi akrava Shabbos b'shas ktsira mia lo nitchas. You don't see it at this point in time where the Torah is saying this avoid is doicha Shabbos. The ilav de lo ev shalah. Mi Erev Shabbos. If it wasn't for the fact that it's impossible to do it on Erev Shabbos, because as Rabbi Lazar B'Shimon holds that the mitzvah has to be done b'davka at night, like Havadochi Shabbos, it wouldn't have been Doicha Shabbos al Mishum Chavivus a mitzvah. V'hachanami l'Rebbe ikal mifrich amay gamar shayni yosam sheridachsa shchida Shabbos. So by Rabbi Lazar diffusing the raya, neutralizing Rabbi's raya, as to why he would allow it to be Doicha Shabbos, now the pressure is back on Rebbe. Ule Rebbe, hachanami, dachsa shchita es ha-Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer, and Rebbe should also make that distinction. Elo, you have to say, in Rebbe, how could he allow it to be Doicha Shabbos? How could he allow the Ktsir Somer to be Doicha Shabbos if Rebbe says you don't have to do it b'davka by night? So for Rebbe, Ktsir Somer loy dochi. He holds Ktsir Somer is not Doicha Shabbos. Rebbe holds Ktsir Somer is not Doicha Shabbos, and in fact, if the first day Chalamoid Shabbos, you would have to cut the Omer before Shabbos. Veloy, are you telling me that Rebbe holds that Ktsir Somer is not Doicha Shabbos? But now we learned V'achachamim Oimrim Echad Shabbos V'echad Choil Mishalei Shayabah. Remember, we had earlier Mishnais that no matter what, they always had three people. They always had three people doing it to create a big tararam that they're doing. They make a whole big process about it to show the tzedukim and the baitusim that you always do it on Motzei Yom Tov, not Motzei Shabbos. I'm sorry. Three saw. There was three people. Three saw. There was a whole discussion in that Mishnah of how it was done. Zokt, and also three magolas, they had three tools. It was done, with big fanfare. Zokt Gemara ein echanami. It says that, but the loy karebi. What about the other Mishnah? It says the Chachamim Oimrim Echad Shabbos Echad Chol B'Shloisha. Oh yeah, so that's the same Mishnah. It's three saw, three people, and B'Shalosh Kupach, three baskets, U'B'Shalosh Magolis. Again, Zokt Gemara the loy karebi. So it's interesting. Rebbe was an Onavad Moed. How do you see this? Because he made this Mishnah. Who wrote the Mishnah? He did. And he quoted the Chachamim Maimrim as Shita that disagreed with him. So even though he disagreed with the Shita, when he wrote his Mishnah, you'd think he would write it based on his Shitas. No, he wrote it based on who he held the halacha should be like. And even though the Chachamim argued on him, he made them into the Stam. Uvi Shabbos, what about the last Mishnah we learned? Uvi Shabbos, Yoimer Lahem Shabbos Zu. Right? Remember, they make an announcement. Should we cut now? Is it light? Is it light now? Is it time to cut? So it's also like Rebbe. So Rebbe actually created Stam Mishnayos that had the opinion that was not Rebbe's opinion, because Rebbe was mevatel his das to the shitas of others. So Akalpan and Rebbe holds that in fact Ksir Shem is not Doiche Shabbos, and Rebbe Lezer Bishim holds Ksir Shem is Doiche Shabbos, which Rebbe seems to paskin like. Zogt Gemara weiter. Nixer b'yoim kosher, and v'doich es ha-Shabbos. Zogt Gemara man shamet lei, domer nixer b'yoim is kosher. That's Rebbe. We just learned that. Rebbe holds nixer b'yoim is kosher, but Lezer B'Shem held it wouldn't be kosher. Vikatani v'doich es ha-Shabbos. And it says that it's doich es ha-Shabbos. Didn't we just finish by saying that Rebbe holds that Ksir is not doich es-Shabbos? Zogt Gemara, my love Ksir. And that's going to be inconsistent with what we just learned in Rebbe. So la krava. When the Mishnah says doiches Shabbos, that's not talking about the tzira. That's talking about the akrava, which taka could only be done on the first day chalamoid, whether it's Shabbos or any other day. Aval tzira loy. But for tzira, you're going to tell me that it's not doiches Shabbos. But tiny we learned Rebbe Omer, vayidaber Moshe Moy Adei Hashem ma Talmud loymar. Why did it say it? So why did we have to have a pasuk that now talks about them all together if we've already discussed them all individually? So we only know that the Korban Tamid and the Korban Pesach would be doiches Shabbos because it says in those parshas the word b'mayadai. But Shar Kabbanas Hatzibur Minayin. How do you know that all the other Kabbanas Hatzibur are also Doiches Shabbos? Talmud Leimer Elu Tasu Lashem B'Moy Adeichem. They're all done on Shabbos. Rashi Vafilu B'Shabbos U'Parshas Pinchas Ksiv Gabi the Musafin. Minayin LeRabbis Omer V'Akarev Imoy Shtei Alechem V'Akarev Imoyin. How do you know that they're also Doiche Shabbos, because it doesn't say that in the parsha of Elu Tasu Lashem. Tamad loyma v'yidaber Moshe Moy Adei Hashem. Hakasuv kova moed l'chulon. So therefore, the Omer is Doiche Shabbos and the Shtei Alechem is Doiche Shabbos. Now, what are we referring to in this pasuk that says it's Doiche Shabbos? What part of it is Doiche Shabbos? Lamai. If you're telling me that the pasuk here is talking about a krova to teach us that a krova is doiches Shabbos, included in it, the Brisa says, they don't put that on the mizbech. They're given in whole to the kohanim. So what chil Shabbos is involved in the akrova of the shtei lechem? Elapshita, what chil is involved? L'tchina v'arkada. It must be that not only are you allowed to present the shtei lechem on Shabbos, you're allowed to prepare it on Shabbos, which would involve malachas, and therefore by Omer, which is put into the brisa together with the shtei lechem, with the kavasaka by Omer, also it would be mutter to do tzira, the preparation for it. The chadachi is a Shabbos. So you see from the brisa that it's doiches Shabbos. Ella, we'll say differently. Ella Omer la krava. The Omer, what part of the Omer is doiches Shabbos? The krava only. And what part of the shtei lechem is doiches Shabbos? Or shtei lechem le'afiyah. That you're allowed to bake it on Shabbos. Because you cannot possibly bake it at any other time. Why? Because of a Rebbe, Tanur Mikadesh. Rebbe holds that it only becomes Kadesh, because to go from the Tanur. But if it does, and you baked it the day before, it would already be Noisar on Shavuos. If Sila La Belina. Fragt Gemara v'Sava Rebbe, Tanur Mikadesh. Rebbe holds the Tanur is Mekadesh. V'Tanya, it's the shchita of the carbon that's Mekadesh. V'Tanya kivzei atzeres ein mekachin es alechem ela b'shchita. It's the shchita that does it. Ketzat shachton l'shmon v'zarch daman l'shmon kidei shalachem, shachtan shaloi l'shman, v'zorak daven shaloi l'shman, like kidei shalachem. And shachtan l'shman, v'zorak daven shaloi l'shman, halechem b'kadosh ve'in kadosh divei Rebbe. Remember, we had a machlokes on Meroim. What it means, like a opinion, not like a opinion. Rabbi Eliezer, Rashi Noimer, la'olam einay kadosh. So you see clearly it's the shchita that's mekadosh to shtei lechem, not afia. Amar Nachman Yitzchak, hukvu v'lo hukvu k'amar. What this brayta means is that when you shecht it, now the shtei lechem cannot be used for any other purpose. Now you have to use this shtei lechem for this carbon. But before the shchita, till the last second, you can substitute another set of shtei lechem and use this shtei lechem for something else. But it's kedushas aguf; it's got already by the afiyah, and therefore the afiyah has to be done on Shavuos. It cannot be done the day before. Baruch Hashem, we were zeicha to finish the 6th parak of Menachos. B'lineder hadnalach Rabbi Shmuel, hadnalach Rabbi Shmuel, hadnalach Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, just because I have a joke that I have to get to the Amud Beis, we'll go through it, but we'll probably start from here tomorrow again. The following menachos, you take a kmitza from them, v'shiyarei and l'kayanim, and the shiraim are given to the kayanim, minchas asaylos, v'machvos, v'macheshes, v'achalos, v'arikikin. These are all the minchas of a yochid that they bring. Minchas oivdik chavim, or minchas noshim, the mincha of a goy, the mincha of a woman, or minchas ha'omer, or minchas chayte, or minchas knois. All of these, there's a kmitza taken from them, and the rest is given to the Kohanim. But Reb Shimon Aimer, minchas chodesh shel Kohanim, you do take the kmitza. Unlike the Tanakama who holds the minchas kohen is kulei kolil, and therefore there's no kmitza done. Reb Shimon holds there is a kmitza done. However, if a kohen makes karev la'atzmoi v'shirayim kreven la'atzmoi. True, it's kolil. You have to put the whole thing on the mizbeach. You burn the whole mincha, but you still have to make a kmitza. Amar Papa, kolecha d'tnan eser tanan. This is the Rav Papa that we've had the 3rd time already. Whenever it says these menachos, either it means there's 10 menachos involved over here, or it means that you have to have either 10 chalos of rikikin and 10 chalos of chalos. You can't have 5 and 5. So when you say I'm bringing a mikvahs mafetaner, you only could bring either 10 rikikin or 10 chalos. Makamash Malon, Fukid Reb Shimon, Damar Mechta Chalois, Mechta Rikikin, Yovi, Kamash Malon Eloi, we had that sugi already. V'shiraim l'kayanim, the shiraim of all these menachos go to l'kayanim, Minalon the chsiva, all of the menachos where it says beferish that the shiraim goes to the kayanim, it says it. And the like chsiva, we have a klal that makes the halacha parallel by all the menachos. Ksiv v'zoyis teres haminkha, hakri v'oisa b'nei haran, v'anayseres mimena yoichlu aron uvanov. Zog to Gemara, that time akasha, bo chitin like a beboilam. All of the menachos that this pasuk of v'zoyis teres hamincha includes are minchas that are brought out of chitin. Kikam beboilam, our shaila of minalan. How do you know that there's a kmitza on the shirayim or eaten by the kahanim is bo sa'orin? I wanted to know about the menachos that come out of barley, which are the minchas soita and the minchas omer. Bo sa'orin nami midin nekmetzes v'balter is a kmitza done sheyareh la kahanim. Zok more true. Aliba d'Rabbanan loy kami boilan. In our Mishnah, who said that just because you make a kmitza, that doesn't mean it's eaten by the kahanim. Damer ika mincha the mikmitza v'loimis achla. The Tanan our Mishnah Shimon Omer minchas chodesh kahanim nikmetzes barakoyim itzkar v'latzmai v'ashirayim kreven latzmai. So we know alone, according to him, how do I know that the mincha of the chayte the mincha of a soita, how do I know that the shiraim are eaten by the kahanim? Amar Chizki Amar Kra v'chol mincha belulav hashemen v'chareva l'chol b'nei aharon tia. I don't need it by a regular mincha of chitin to tell you that the kahanim eat it, because we already had a pasuk. So tnayu ini leblula shal sayrin. V'meini ini lechareva shal chitin. And if I don't need it to tell me, so the belula shal sayrin is the omer, and if you don't need it for chareva shal chitin, because we already have a pasuk that a minchas chareva is chol b'nei aron tira, So therefore, today in lecharev shel iron, which will be the mincha of a saita. Zok the Gemara b'Hayla Hachida also. I am a boile. We need it for something else. Lechatanya minayin shein chalkim menachos connected zvachim. How do you know that a kohen cannot say, you know what, I don't want meat today. You can have my meat. I'll take your mincha, or vice versa. Talmud Leimer, but I don't have the next half, so we'll have to wait for tomorrow. Everyone should have an awesome, wonderful day.